Hi there. Welcome. Happy half hour to you. So glad that you came to join us tonight. My name is Susy Schultz. I am the executive director of the Museum of Broadcast Communication. And here's one of my favorite things to do each week. Those are the NBC chimes. Those are original chimes that are housed at the Museum of Broadcast Communication. Whoops, forgot where I worked. Downtown, but I have them here at home, and we are open a little bit every once in a while. So I want you to take a look at that website. We're going to be open. We were open this past weekend to celebrate Indigenous Peoples Day, and we will be open on Halloween because we know that you cannot get enough of Svengoolie. So we're hoping that you'll come and join us. See, stay tuned. Rock Up TV, the exhibit that's there. Wander through the Radio Hall of Fame and have a little bit of time. We will have treats for anybody, any kids who are coming, or any big kids who are coming. If you don't mind reaching one little piece of candy with a tweezers. How's that? So we keep you safe there, and we're looking forward to seeing you there. If we can't see you in person, we hope to see you online. Because if you haven't noticed it already, we have an exhibit online called GreatDebates.org, and it talks about the broadcast industry's impact on the presidential debates. And I think we have seen a lot of headlines lately about the presidential debates. We've managed to have a discussion after each debate, the presidential and the vice presidential. Will have one if there is another presidential debate afterwards to talk about how to teach this, how you, as either a lifelong learner, a parent, or an educator, can teach this on our website. We have curriculum, we have articles, we have a 100-year timeline. And today we wanted to talk a little bit with our dear friend. I think we can call you a dear friend, can't we, Gini?
Indeed, we can.
Use a Yes, he is here. He is professor emeritus of business ethics at Loyola University. This man is prolific. He's written more than 14 books, and you've got another one coming out soon. And I am really eager to talk about that when it's closer to coming out. And he
Yes, indeed.
also has a great perspective on so many different things. Al, we're so happy to have you here.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Welcome. That's great. That's great. That's great. And somebody's calling you. Is that true?
Is that the phone in the background? Every 2 or 3 months, a call does come through, and I'm so sorry it's on your dime. But I think
It's
it's
not a
gone now.
problem. It's kind
I
of
still
nice
have
to hear it.
I still have a landline with a dial on it that drives my grandchildren crazy. It's not a real dial; it's a digital. But I bought it at I think Pottery Barn years and years ago. I just have it on my desk, and I insist on keeping the landline. I don't know why. When you're old, you
No,
get to
my
have these proclivities.
my sister still has a landline with a rotary phone in the basement, and
Yes,
I will tell you,
yes,
all of the kids go down to go, look at this, look at what it does.
yes,
How long did
exactly.
it take them to make a call?
I hate to say
So
this, but
it's
I remember in my grandmother's dining entranceway, that's where the phone was kept. It was always kept in a hallway, and it was the pole phone with the detached hearing. So you literally had to speak into it, and it was a party line. You could only talk for 3 minutes, otherwise people yelled at you. Ah, how we've advanced.
we have advanced, and yet we always still go back to history to find out
Yeah,
where we are today. Correct, and that's one of the reasons we
indeed.
wanted to. It's been a time. It's been to say it's been a time is really an understatement. We wanted to talk a little bit about the debates that we've been through so far.
Hmm.
We have had a presidential debate and a vice presidential debate. And really, how did we do in terms of the art of debate in these debates,
Yeah,
El
yeah,
Gini?
yeah. Well, as a student of leadership, I've been teaching business ethics, and of course, the natural evolution of teaching ethics to organizations is leadership, whether at the political or the business level. I have to argue, I have to be a contrarian here. I really don't think we had either a presidential or a vice presidential debate. I think let's start with the vice presidential debate because it's less acrimonious than the presidential debate. What both of those
Mhm.
individuals were doing in a much more civilized form than the presidential debate was posturing and presenting kind of pablum interpretations of their basic positions. They
And
did
you say
not debate.
Pablum
They did not
regardless of
answer.
party line. Pablum
Pablum, I
regardless of
mean, they
party
watered, yeah. And both of them, and both of them were as guilty. I mean, she said, well, Joe said this. And then he said, the president did this. And yes, we do have a policy in regard to Obamacare, and we're going to roll it out. Well, the question would be, you've had 4 years to roll it out. Do you have something to roll out? Do it now. What they simply did was give you an index of things that they've been talking about, trying to state their position as clearly as possible, even if both positions were rather tenuous or without substance, without detail, without depth, without real drama. Anybody who could make up their mind, given that, let's still call it debate, that non-debate, I'm going to call it a non-debate. I'm wondering what they're doing politically, if they could get anything out of that. As Stephen Colbert suggested on his show afterwards, I was riveted to the middle of my seat through the whole thing, meaning, that there was no there, and both of them were very polite. And the vice president was somewhat less polite, but kept going in a modulated tone. He didn't scream, he didn't yell. He bowed, said thank you every time. But it was pablum. It was without substance, without depth. And I think that for both the president and the vice president, they're talking about leadership. And leadership is a gift, a talent, something that, an art form, and something that's learned. I think I've said this before in other versions of the show, that Michael Jordan came to Chicago without a proficient jump shot. He was a great athlete, an incredible workaholic, and practiced that shot again and again until he did develop that shot. Leadership is learned. You don't take, as we've now proven right now, someone without political experience and forgetting the politics themselves, and just say, well, now you can run the government. That's a lovely, lovely idea in 1776 when nobody had been president before, or actually
Mm-hmm.
1789, forgive me, after it was all over. And as Adams was getting in trouble because he wanted to call the president His Majesty, or His First Majesty, or His Majesty the President, because he wanted to give some gravitas to the notion of leader. So we didn't know what we were doing. We know what we're doing now. It's falling apart. That's another discussion for another day. So nothing really happened. Those two people postured, then smiled. She has a beautiful smile. He is central casting. Send me the vice president of the United States, isn't he? I mean, even the fly was decorously placed on his head. This man looks like a vice president, right? I mean,
I think
fine.
I
And
think
the tie is
anytime
perfect.
you have these two leaders with this caliber, basically the whole discussion, many of the television stations started with the fly. So
Yeah.
the fact that they moved quickly to the fly, the fact that that could be the discussion on all of this
Right,
was to
right.
me
That should have been the
hysterical.
last thing
And
that it should have been the last thing said in CNN. Oh, by the way, wasn't that fly somewhat humorous? Rather than the fly added depth and gravitas to the debate. And
so let's
that
get
was
to the
true.
idea of debate. What is
Well, let me
debate?
that
What is it?
yeah, all right.
How far do we
Okay.
have to go? Where did this
All
start?
right. Well,
Where did we start the problem?
I I think you have to start with people like John Adams, and if you read John Adams's work, I mean, he wrote volumes and volumes of his own biography and his speeches, and he collected them, so on and so forth. He actually sat down and debated with people, and he was a lawyer. He understood debate. He was trained at Harvard. Harvard was based on the Oxford Cambridge school system, so he understood debate. Debate, as even I mentioned to you off air, the Oxford debate series, has a grand history where they would take two people, polar opposite, offer them a question: should high heels be allowed in public? And for the pro, and then for the contrary, and they would debate and respond to each other's questions to some extent, and then the crowd would vote on that. Now, the classic debate, the one that everyone remembers, especially in Illinois, and I was there, was the Stephen Douglas Abraham Lincoln debate when he was running for senator twice, and they went around the state. There was no
You
other
were there. You
media.
were
They said,
everywhere.
well, I was young, but I don't remember all of it. But according to my children, I was probably the driver, but that's another story. And they got up and they debated and they shared some questions ahead of time. And there was a lot of vulgarity in it. This was show business still. It was still show business. Don't get me wrong. Hundreds and hundreds of people
Mhm.
showed up for it. They had to project their voice. It couldn't be too many people. If there were 10,000 people there and you're back of the crowd, you didn't hear a thing. There was no projection system whatsoever, but they tried to answer each other. And the proof of the pudding was that was all transcribed and printed out the next day. It was a typographical society. Words mattered in those days. Lincoln
Right.
became the candidate for the Republican Party because of his speech in New York about his position on slavery and the Republican Party's position on slavery. That speech alone made him the candidate because he had an ideological reference to go to. So in these debates, they
Mhm.
really talked about what I really believed in, what I don't believe in. There were speeches given by even by politicians that said exactly what they wanted. I just read, to my great horror, the vice president of the Confederacy's acceptance speech, um, and when the Confederacy was established, and he gets up there and argues philosophically, ethically, and economically why African Americans were substandard human beings and should be and must be maintained as slaves for our benefit and theirs. The white race is supreme. Any white man in America, he said, has more rights and has greater rights than a black person. And those were not the terms he used. But he gave a philosophical argument, a wretched one. I would have failed him in my ethics course. And I don't think it's, but there was an argument there. What arguments did we hear at the other nights? Joe's not going to get rid of, quick, what is he not going to get rid of? The fracking. Joe's not going to do this. Joe's a lovely man. The president said to me just yesterday, we're going to continue. It was just posturing. Now, let's look at the presidential debate. Equally not a debate. And my
No,
great
it wasn't even a discussion. It was just constant interruption. So
constant
you can
interruption.
nobody anything. Pardon me?
Now, I understand in the English system, that happens all the time in Parliament. They yell, they roar, 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 and all those backbenchers screaming and yelling. That's not our tradition. And what was horrifying to me was that a game show MC thought he was back on a game show, and that he forgot that he is the majesty of the presidency of the United States, and that there is an element of decorum, there's an element of dignity, there's an element of posturing that is simply required by virtue of the office. If you're a mortician, if you're a doctor, you don't dance into the room and say, bad news, patient expired, submit the bill tomorrow. There are standards of etiquette, there are standards of decorum that have to maintain, and there was an utter lack of gravitas. Now, I'm not hiding anything. I'm a card-carrying FDR agency theory Democrat. And Joe Biden made 3 or 4 gaffes, like, oh, shut up, listen to him. But the response was human at that point. And so I don't want to let Mr. Biden off the hook entirely, but that was not a debate. They were then yelling at each other, and then they had a voice over each other. But the awful thing was, for me, on one side, it was simply denials and then turn it to something else. That's not true. That was denials, something else. And then the arguments ad hominem. Don't we teach our 3rd graders not to do that? Don't we teach our high school students that you can't make fun of somebody's dress or background or attire? University of Delaware, you call that an education? What are you, 47th in your class? I was first in my class. Not that I know of, by the way, but that's another story. That there's arguments against the person. Now, if Mr. Biden showed up drunk and disheveled, perhaps commentary on his decorum would be appropriate. But what happened there was not. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No.
I was going to say what happened there.
Go ahead. You go.
There was not an exchange of ideas. There was not an exchange of positions. There wasn't point, counterpoint, conclusion, or affirmation or denial. That would have been lovely, but no one really expected that, did they? I mean, the president's demeanor was not au contraire to his entire last 4 years, but nevertheless, I was shocked at it. And if I were a card-carrying Republican, and I know a couple Republicans, I even sleep with one. That's my wife, and there's a perfect political proposition there that can be defended. There's a perfect political ideology there that can be logically explained and can be admired to a certain extent. I think they're wrong, but I'm just teasing right now. But that had to be an embarrassment to anyone who has an R and is considered red.
So the right good gentleman from Loyola makes a very good point, may I say. And so where do you think that as we look longitudinally on all of this, where do you think that we went awry? When I think back to the presidential debate, the first one on television, 1960, we have Kennedy, we have Nixon, there was substance discussed there. There was,
Yes.
we do know we looked past that as an audience and look for, we looked more for, if Kennedy, those watching on TV thought that the tanned and toned Kennedy won, those listening on radio thought that Nixon
Yeah,
won.
yeah,
Um,
right.
but where did it do? Carter 4? Did we
Well,
move as we moved ahead? Where did we lose it?
well, ironically, you've just it was just the opposite. They had a substantive campaign, and then we judged them on how Jack's hair looked and how Nixon perspired and how his beard was too coarse. Great irony, but they actually talked issues. Both men liked each other personally, respected each other as senators because they both worked hard. And I would point out Nixon worked a lot harder than Jack. Nixon didn't have the depth of Daddy behind him and the staff that Jack was able to put together. But Nixon was a
Right.
hard worker. Nothing, forget the politics, forget what happened in the long run. They really debated. Even the debate that was on the radio then later, where there are two different cities. They was point counterpoint. They were both classically trained. They both went to law school. They both, if I did Jack was Jack a lawyer? No, I'm just forgetting right now. Jack was a lawyer, wasn't he? Jack Kennedy.
Jack was a lawyer. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, I think so. Right.
yes.
But then
And you,
Jack went to Harvard and went through the debate system, and so did Mr. Nixon went to Duke and certainly knew. And in those days, law schools were all debate and disclosure in regard to an issue. So I think that there was real somewhere along the line they became television events. I think when Benson said um, of the vice president candidate at the time for Bush 1, and I'm forgetting it, the senator from Indiana. Help me, the young man from Indiana. I'm
oh,
forgetting his
Dan,
name.
you're talking about
Oh,
Dan.
Dan Quayle. And when Benson
By the
said to
way,
him, "I
I
know
wanted to
Jack
stop.
Kennedy,"
I'm going to stop you before you say that. I do not know. I can't remember whether Jack Kennedy was an attorney or not. So I just want to stand corrected.
yeah,
And you
I
were going
wasn't.
to say,
When
I think he
when
was.
Benson said of Dan Quayle, I
Go
think
ahead.
he was too. I don't think he ever practiced. I know Ted did not get his degree, and certainly Bobby got his degree because he was attorney general.
Right.
Anyway, when Quayle said, "I know Jack Kennedy, and I know you, and you believe me, you are not Jack Kennedy," that was a telling
That
line,
was
and it may have
part
been a sea shift.
of it. Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah, that was a sea
That was
shift.
his
I
opponent
think since, yeah,
right.
and
Hmm.
certainly Reagan's debates were were charming. He was beautiful. Come on, I mean, I'm older than he was then, but you know, I mean, come on, he was gorgeous. He was 70 years old, and his hair never moved, and it was still not great. It's an amazing fact of apparently living in California. But he looked in that camera and smiled. He knew how to smile. He knew how to act. And so they
But
became
there were
more posturing.
there were the personal attacks. There were the personal. They were
Yes, of
subtler.
course.
They
Yes.
were the there you go again. Like
Yeah.
you're always going off on that, and very much a scolding, more avuncular role on that. And there were, I think a lot of the quote unquote attacks have often come after the debate, that
Yeah.
where we've had people, who was the woman who was moderating the debate between Bush and Carter and Perot, had no idea that
Right.
anything was going on while Bush was watching his because she didn't see him look at his watch. Afterwards, kind of like the fly in the vice
Yeah.
presidential
Yeah. Yeah.
debate,
Yeah. Yeah.
a
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
big deal out of those things. So is it
Now
how
these
where
debate.
find blame? Is it analysis that has become too character driven? Is it the or is it both?
Well, part of it is the
The,
media itself. You've got to fill an hour and a half. It's show business. And so, you want good rate. Now, everyone does it, so I guess everyone's ratings are okay, right? I mean, you can find it on any channel. But I think the media has watered down the gravitas of the debates as well. But I do think since let's just put Kennedy and Nixon, the debates have been an opportunity for the American public to see a little bit more the presidential style. Remember, until the early 20th century, excuse me, presidential candidates never campaigned, never debated. They sat at home, and
right.
surrogates did that. So now, since and Roosevelt never went out, not at all, not after the first one. He worked the first one pretty hard, and some of the second one. But then after that, I mean, he called Harry Truman in and said, "Harry, you're vice president. Now get in that train and get going," and he was cross country. So I think that it did change. Television changed everything. In my lifetime, I've seen presidents killed. I've seen my next door neighbor die in Vietnam because he happened to be in that shot. You know,
Wow.
with Walter Cronkite or one of the CBS people were there. I mean, Ronnie died, and I said, "Oh my God, I know him. It's the kid across the street." So television has changed everything, right? We've seen assassins killed on TV. We've seen, we watched the 911 thing happen in real time. I thought Arnold
Right.
Schwarzenegger was going to come out of that somewhere, right? Television's changed our life. The media has changed the quality of the message, the depth of the message, and the message itself. Marshall
Can
McLuhan.
we can we recover from this? Can we, part of what the museum is about in this era, we hope, is not just talking warmly and nostalgically about what happened when
Right,
we were
right.
12, we watched on TV. We do want to be thinking, what does it mean? What's the impact? That's why the Great Debates is really going to be the template for how we look at different
Yeah.
parts of what the broadcast industry has done. But how can we rein this back? Can we? I
and,
mean,
and the
where are
and the best possible yeah, in the best possible of all worlds, I think the media itself, the major media now, media, by the way, it's not just four three channels anymore. It's, look at CNN, and Ted Turner has said the best thing I've ever done was CNN. Forget all the billions of dollars I've made. um,
Mhm.
I think the media, the politicians, the parties have to sit down and say, look, what are we doing here? We're not just running for the, homecoming king or homecoming queen, I hope soon, but rather we're talking about running and ruling a nation. Business people aren't that out there that way. I mean, how many great talks have you heard from what's his name at Apple right now, Cook? You didn't even hear
Mhm.
Cook for 18 months after he took over, right? He's been judicious about getting out there. Did Obama have a press conference every day? Never, because he was too busy doing his stuff and the presidency. So I think somewhere along the line, the power brokers, and that includes the media, has to talk about what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. And then you can't force that. But don't we need a plebiscite to help encourage that to some extent? I
So
I
I,
don't
I would
I'm
say though, I'm going to say that it's not just the media and the candidates because we are all now curators of information.
right,
I've got
right.
this wonderful phone sitting right here in my
Yeah,
pocket that, and I
absolutely.
can say to all the people out there, I think this is really wonderful. And I may not have, we've seen studies from the Pew Research Center that shows that very often many of us will just forward something without reading it. Many of us
Right.
will not take a look and see, are there any sources in it? We don't practice any media literacy or news literacy on what we're doing. So it becomes not just the media and the politicians, but it's all of us feeding into
Well,
this discourse.
that's what I mean by the media. I think the media is all of us. All of us have these little devices in our pockets. They're not phones or computers with a phone app. We
Yeah.
could contact half the world while we're talking to your best friend too, simultaneously. I, I think it may have gotten away from us. I don't mean to be too much of a pessimist, but I have been a pessimist of late on this. I think that we're
Mhm.
not going to have I'm not sure we ever had the decorum that I'm really talking about. If you read about Congress, if you read about the Senate, if you read about the senators and their actions, we were just as salty and just as violent as Parliament, more violent. I mean, we've had senators beaten up, almost killed in the Senate by an opponent who comes across and thumps
Right.
them to death, Senator Sumner from Massachusetts. And we've had, some real debates. And yet there's something about the old club. And my argument, let me give you one metaphor and a model that maybe works. Somewhere along the line in 1969, 71, I think I shared this with you. I shot the Colorado River and down there in Arizona, and it was amazing. And one night, Barry Goldwater and Ted Kennedy show up behind me in a boat, and we camped at the same place. We had a football game. Ted could throw the ball pretty well, by the way, and they were friends, even though they're enemies. Remember, until 15 years ago, congressmen and senators lived in Washington. Jerry Ford's children were raised in Washington. Al Gore lived in a hotel and then a house and went to school in Washington. They didn't fly home every other day. And they were friends. Remember who Lyndon Johnson's best friend was in Senate?
Tell me, tell me, tell me. I forgot.
Everett Dirksen of Illinois.
Oh,
Oh, so when he says, now Everett, I need you to do this for me, Everett. Now I'm asking you as a friend, but I'm asking you as as a politician
so
as well. And they did it because they were friends. They knew each other.
okay,
And
so let me now
and there was a
let me construct that a little bit, because what we have then is we have a system too that was exclusionary. We had a system too where it was friends and it was the good old boys. There weren't
yeah.
women in there, there were people of color in there. So when we're at this point where we have taken off the gloves, is that a way to clean out the system? Is that a way to take away when we take away those formalities that in so many ways hid injustice? Are we now moving into a different era the way we should to clean things out?
No, we're not. We're not moving in the way we should. And I want to grant you all those things. It was an old boys club. There were no women. I mean, the four female Congress people there now would have been what? That wasn't even possible as an option. That we should have had a female president already. It wasn't even a possibility. Do we even know? Do we even know what Mimi Eisenhower did during the day for 8 years? No. Apparently, she stayed in bed and read a lot of letters. I think. Everything's changed, and I don't think there's any way to go back.
Hmm.
And I don't want to idolize any particular time because every time has been fluid or faulty. But we've lost the the Plato is right. When individuals cannot reason in a non-passionate way, even about passionate ideas, we lose the opportunity to act well together. And I
Yes.
think that's our problem right now. We cannot reason about things. Everything is a contest. Everything is a political move rather than the greater good. This is what we've forgotten is the notion of commonwealth, that this society is what it is because we share this great country together as a collective. But when we fragment it, when we charge it all up, when we don't like a governor in Michigan, let's go kidnap her and maybe kill her or ransom her. Why not? We're Americans, we have rights. Something's wrong there. Something's deeply wrong. So I think the debates, or the so-called debates, are an example of, I think, the breakdown from Cool Hand Luke, the breakdown of communication.
Yes, the failure. So I want to actually end on a pretty good note, because if
Okay.
because say we have been a little bit depressing here, but one of the modules that we have in great debates is about leadership in the time of COVID-19, and we
Yeah.
look historically back at what other leaders have done, how they have moved through times of crisis, whether it was George Bush at 9/11, even Abraham Lincoln. I mean, and when we talk about I think one of the amazing things that the Abraham Lincoln Museum was the exhibit that used to be there, that, and I'm not sure if it is still there because I haven't been there for a while. It was all the voices reading different letters and reading
Yeah,
different
yeah,
editorials. How
yeah.
vicious and critical they were. We
Awful,
have
awful,
been
awful.
through
Yeah,
awful times, and
awful times.
so finding that level of discourse and ability where where we're not fracturing one another just because we believe in a different way is, that's really important. And I think that comes with civic engagement, teaching children and students that their voices matter, as well as a
But
little
so
bit
do
of
other
leading.
voices matter. So do other voices matter. And that's the other side of that coin we have to do.
Yeah. Yes, yes,
And by
yes.
the way, you're quite
And
right. Lincoln was vilified. Lincoln was depicted as a guerrilla or a deeply challenged, intellectually challenged African American, facially.
we are
And so there was
we get
awful, awful time.
we get vicious when it comes to race. We get
Yeah,
vicious
yeah,
with the meaning, and I mean the white establishments get vicious, trying to make sure that this doesn't happen. And it's scary, but it's also predictable,
yeah.
because that we have seen it rise when we have seen equality open up, and that it's a dangerous point. It's a flashpoint. So
It
it's
is.
a good thing that we solved all the problems in these last 30 minutes. So, so I am going to say thank you very much, Algini. I am looking forward to having you back again, because it is always a pleasure to talk to you. And I think that actually people tell me it's a pleasure to listen to you too.
Well,
So,
the pleasure is
um,
entirely mine. Thank you very much.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. And all of you out there, I really hope that you join us again. Join us next week. I think we're actually going to be talking about a media organization that's putting a lot of information out there, helping a lot of people in the media. And I'm excited. I haven't nailed it yet, so I can't say for sure, but I hope that you'll join us. And we hope to see you here soon. And if there's another presidential debate, we'll be there.